You hear me? Yes, I can hear. All right. Welcome to this session. It's a fairly open-ended one because this is really about how each of us approach feminism and women's issues in our lives. So I'm sure you've read our bios on their website, so I'm not going to introduce them, but I'm going to first ask Maithreyi Karnoor to begin the session. Go ahead, Maithreyi.
Hi. Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Maithreyi, and I write poetry, among other things. So I've always thought that one is not a successful thinker or writer or poet unless when you go to an interview or something and they ask you a question and with this very casual air you say, well, yes and no, So I want to make myself successful today by asking myself if what I write is feminist poetry, and the answer is yes and no. Yes, because I think I'm some sort of a feminist in the way I live my life. So by extension, what I write is also feminist. No, because I don't think about it all the time. Poetry, by its definition, or rather by the lack of its definition, is such a space that it speaks to each of us in very different ways. But in the beginning, it starts off as an expression, a very personal expression of the poet's thoughts. So, and unlike other forms of writing, poetry can seek to go beyond meaning and coherence and still be beautiful, because it's through the light that shines through the cracks in its meaning that it attracts you to it, and it comes alive in the reader's mind, really. And the modern poetic form or forms that I read and write, that most of us do, is all about language, and we manifest our existence in language, and we put a little bit of ourselves in it. I write poetry, I write fiction, and I translate. And I think I can safely say I'm at a place where, on the one hand, I don't think of them as being apart from each other. They are all different aspects of the same kind of creative aspiration, and that they are largely intuitive. I think all writing is translation, because you translate abstract ideas into concrete words, and all translation is writing, because you're retelling existing stories in new ways. And there again, you put a bit of yourself, so whether or not you're thinking of the gender question, it's still you, and if you think you are a feminist, it's there. So my journey has been that of a typical small town person, being raised in restrictive structures, not knowing abuse for abuse, perhaps having perpetuated that abuse in unconscious ways, and then learning to understand it through reading and the willingness to question, finding some answers, some right, some wrong, learning, unlearning, and the process goes on. And I don't, you must probably notice I'm not talking about it in very concrete terms, because on the one hand, I don't want to relive some of the trauma, and on the other hand, I think I'm just really bored of it, because moving on and living with it and trying to be happy is ultimately what matters. And I did learn feminist theory academically at university, and it helped me orient myself, understand a lot of things about myself. But of late, I think while I stay steadfast in my belief in gender and social justice, I have zoomed out a little bit from thinking about these in very pointed ways, because I think too much, this extra need to be critical kind of leads to a lot of othering, and because there's never really one complete resolution. You're always excluding something or somebody there. there's a lot of name calling, anti this, phobic that, Nazi this and that. And I think it takes you far away from what really matters, or at least what matters to me in the end is empathy and respect and compassion. For instance, a couple of years ago, I attended this play performed by students of a theatre school, and they used the malkam. I don't know if you know this. It's a 8 to 10 feet tall wooden pole, and it takes, and you balance on it, and it's a very, very difficult prop. It takes great amounts of practice and great physical and mental strength to be able to use that, and it was just stunning. 2 hours of pure magic. It just went by, and everyone was appreciative of it. And in the end, they asked the audience to come up and respond to it. And this one extremely educated gentleman, a very senior academic, came up, and we thought he's going to say something nice about it, but he started deriding it, and he said, I hated it, phallic symbol and blah, blah. And I was like, Hade yaar, I mean, these kids have fought odds. They've probably fought poverty. They've fought against their parents to be allowed to take theater as a discipline. And they've worked so hard, and if all your critical theory does is get in the way of you having one kind word for them, I don't see the point in it. So, I think the sophistication that poetry brings, it creates so much space for you where you can decide to occupy whatever space you want in very abstract ways. And I think I have chosen to be in the space that has to do with irony and satire and humor. That is important to me. Yeah, okay. Am I to read now, or will we do that in the second round? Okay, sure. Yeah, so I think it's really important to laugh, to be able to laugh at oneself, laugh at our situation, laugh away our sorrows, laugh with the ones we love. So yeah, I will read. Do we take turns, or do I just read all the poems that I want to? Yeah, all right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I will read one poem now, and there's a little anecdote I would like to share, which may or may not have anything to do with the poem. I'll just leave it out there. Okay, all right, yeah. So yeah, all right, yeah. I'm 40 years old, and even now, when I visit my parents, I don't get any privacy because that concept doesn't exist. And if I have to talk to my boyfriend, I have to go out in the fields because there's always somebody eavesdropping and commenting on it. So a couple of years ago, when I was staying with my parents, I had to talk to my boyfriend, and I took the phone and went into the fields. Before I left, my mom said, tie your hair. I said, why? I mean, I was about to, put up a fight. I was wondering, is she going to say this is not tradition to leave your hair out or something? She said, no, in the fields there are bears that come in and they might think you're one of them. So this poem is called Raising Mum a Saint. This is an unpublished poem in my manuscript, and I'm waiting for my agent to find it a home. Raising Mum a Saint. The sorrow of a dog's howl blends with the train's hoot and is carried off along with its cargo of migrant workers to distant lands and languages of grief. The conjoined wail taking to its heels gives pause to my mum's gaze of retrospection. She quickly bundles up her regrets and with a quick shift of her eyes, flings them over the anthills in the fields in the direction of the now empty railway track. Not wanting for the next caravan of pointlessness, she goes out to eat all the guavas on the trees before the one-eyed sloth bear from the nearby forest finds them. She likes them a little unripe.
Read one more.
Okay. So I know somebody who has a mother-in-law who insists that she keep separate utensils for the domestic help. So my friend put up a fight, and there was a scene and everything. So now the mother-in-law has a separate set of utensils because everything else is shared by everyone else. Well, this is how we resist. This is how we make space Um, this one is called Air, Water, Language. It was published in Poetry at Sangam. Um, on a humid afternoon, we sat together, united by life, divided by language. The world was wet, thoughts held moisture, words were scarce, but moods had vantage. Our nods felt true and smiles were hearty in knowing that we were communicating. Between my Hindi and her Marathi, we managed to agree the air was sweating.
Hi everyone, I'm Zilka Joseph. I'm going to read a few poems for you so that you get an idea of the range of approaches. Closer? Okay. So that you get an idea of the range of approaches I have toward feminism. I'm just going to put a stopwatch also so I don't go over time. So I just want to say a very, very deep thank you to the organizers, to Shubodh, to Shiny, and everybody else who's been running around for me, especially Gokul and Falgun and Sadiq. Okay, so we kept this title of this panel quite wide, so that we could just talk about our own experiences and how we came to this even awareness of feminism. Because I did not grow up with that word in my head, or I was not taught it. And my approach is not academic, it's more personal, as well as, you know, imbibing what's happening in the world outside. So there are as many versions and definitions of feminism as there are women. But what I want to share today is what I'm passionate about, and that is giving the unheard voices, the erased, the wronged, the people who have had terrible injustices and violence done against them. I want to give them a voice, including my mother, the tribute to my mother, who did not have the choices and the opportunities that I was given. And of course, in every way, resisting patriarchy in whatever form or way I could, even though I had a very dominating father, but he, you know, just a heart of gold. He was a sailor, so he embodied that old school kind of dominance. He was a chief engineer with Scindia Steam Navigation, if some of you may remember that company. Shipping companies. So I'm going to do a few poems for you. All right, the first poem I'm going to read is a very short ghazal, and it was dedicated to Jyoti Singh, whose name I think is burned in our memories. You know, there's no woman in India who does not recognize this name. And with what's happening in Manipur and everywhere else, I'm dedicating it also to all of us who are fighting this. The poem is called What Burns. And I have a few quotes from the newspapers that publish these kinds of things, and I'll do that. Only 20% of girls are good. Hood them and tame them, or it's you they'll burn. What do you want? To be God, man, or beast? Your karma, your goddesses, your crosses burn. You say smother them small in wombs or home, no food, books, dowry, and no bra to burn. Will mercy reign on the holy who pray, who say none but devils and rebels burn? Who will remember when we turn to ash? O poet, words are witness, make darkness burn. The next poem I picked 3 short poems and then 3 slightly longer ones. This poem is called Black-Eyed Susan or Black-Eyed Suzanne. It's a bright yellow flower of the daisy family. And of course, it becomes a metaphor for something else. Black-eyed Susan. Back she breaks through swamp and mud, her black eyes smile, holding secrets as deep as the sky. Like all her once bright-faced sisters, now crushed by boot heels, she will bloom again in her season. Curls spilling, her bruised body leans into the sun and weeps petals to the wind, fights quietly the thunder in the air, the sights in the fields, bends to shield her children, shows them what strong roots they have. Thank you. Just checking the page number here. I wanted to share with you a sonnet. It's an unrhymed sonnet, but it is still in iambic pentameter, or blank verse, as you may know it for. And it glorifies the willow, but it also has a lot of symbols of Christianity, such as crucifix and the Madonna. So, but it sort of subverts that image of the Madonna. Weep, willow, weep. Weep it all out of you then. Your body is bent low. They have taught you well. Accept that slap of wind, that angry blast of rain, scourge, storm, whims of God and unknown forces. The crucifixes wait. Is this your fate? Your nail-like leaves hang in rows of crosses. Your heart, wrought from stars and earth, bears 7 scars. And what was your sin? To be alive? Spring, not sorrow, is eternal, graceful one. You have bled life away in prayerful weeping. Enough. Now let your hair fly loose, you wild woman, you. Madonna of trees, rise from your bleeding knees. Lift up your head. Tear the bare heavens open with your teeth. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do a slight shift here to another short poem because I just wanted to give you a little bit of range here. This is where I'm trying to subvert the origin story in the Bible of good old Adam and Eve, and it's called Apples and Oranges. And you'll know who the she is that I'm talking about. There never were any apples in Eden, only oranges, vibrant sun shining, fruit of dust and heat that warmed to her pulse, beating stronger and brighter, fruit of earth itself. She was ripe like the sun before she even thirsted, reached and opened her petals to the radiance fragrant in her palm, before the lush fire licked her tongue, and before the coiled serpent of creation threw her into subterranean shadow. She knew she would always be the sun, even when the gates closed behind her. And though history would try new tricks, twist orange to apple, the men with missing bones, the snakes, would stay the same. Thank you. I'm going to switch very quickly to a couple of poems that I want to honor my mother, because that's where I get a lot of my strength from in a lot of the poems that I write, because hers was a life that could have been, I think, much richer. She would have been a Bharatnatyam dancer. I think she even performed in Mumbai. But when the troupe was getting ready to go abroad, her father, like a lot of more conservative fathers, I come from a Ben Israel family, they were also quite conservative, very Indian in our ways, if you know a little bit about our community. And she was not allowed to do that, and soon was paired with my father and had to marry. But here we go. Okay, the Bharatnatyam dancer, and I don't have to explain a lot of the references here, so that's wonderful. Imagine this. It's Shiva's Rudra Tandav my mother performs, frenzied dance of destruction. her lotus feet scorching the earth with flame. Not the great god's 3 wild locks or river Ganga bursting through matted curls, but a thick black rope of hair whipping the backs of her knees. Her sari pleats open and close, the palla of silken sweep bound in a belt of gold. How thunderous her cold eyes, how pure the gesture of her ever-changing mudras. But where was your fury, O sweet mother? Nataraj, where your protective flame? Did your 3 eyes freeze unweeping, and deaf your holy ears to hear the sounds of 100 brass gungrus thrumming on her ankles? No, 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 you heard her feet, the bells, the beat, her lightning feet. You heard her desire, you heard her steps, her dance. Shatter Mount Kailash, your home, your God abode, your manly kingdom. You heard the audience roar, you knew all along her father's will, that he would say to her, no more, no more. The tongue of every ankle bell ripped out, her heart a tomb, her art, her frame turned to cinders by you, you jealous, jealous Lord of Dance. And I'm going to end. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all being here, for listening, and for allowing us to this wonderful opportunity. I'm going to end with a short poem also dedicated to my mother. Most of these poems come from my book, Sharp Blue Search of Flame. It's available as an ebook from the press called Wayne State University Press. I also have a book available called Sparrows and Dust, which is one of my newer books, so I hope you will honor all of us by buying something to take home with you. So I'm going to read this, and then we are going to, Sophia is going to read, and then we'll have a brief talk together. The hands that lit the Shabbat lamps. This poem, I'm focusing on my mother lighting the lamps, but we all took turns, and especially when I returned from the US home, I was always given the privilege of lighting them first. By mother's hands, what did they dream? Tough and weathered they are, heavy, thick, square, nailed, strong, did a lifetime of labor in a man's world, bore the weight of all our needs, the brunt of a mother-in-law's tongue, dad's quick temper. How hard those pale hands slaved, tinted with turmeric, smelling of garlic, cilantro, cloves, cinnamon, and high butter on high holidays, and at night, Pond's cold cream. For special times, she wore nail polish for silk sari evenings or gold jewelry events, dad's official dinners for weddings. The rougher her fingers grew, the more she slid into her shell, hiding her true heart, just as her mother's had, even before the 4th, the unwanted daughter, my mother, was born. When did her palms turn to steel? Child given extra work, less education than her sisters, even less play? These hands so old now, so brave, what did they dream? These hands that taught us how to light the Shabbat lamps. When did they have soft skin? How wise these hands, webbed with cracks, curling early to fit inside my father's palms. Now, aged, arms weak, head bowed, they both stand by the door, reach to touch the mezuzah, kiss, they shema, kiss each other on the lips, holding hands when they leave. She leads him, he, the half-blind head of the house, and takes one shaky step at a time. Thank you so much. Sophia, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Naz. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Bengaluru Poetry Festival, and I'd like to thank the organizers for making this wonderful event possible. So, I'd like to talk a little bit about my approach to poetry, to feminism through poetry. if feminism can be understood as the ability to exert agency, then I believe poetry is the form that allows one to exert the maximum amount of agency, because it is the form that is free of the constraints of utilitarian language. And it is this approach that I've taken, because it's also congruent with the idea, with the origin of the word poetry. The word poetry comes from the Greek poesis, which literally means to make something new. So this is what I'm doing. By paying close attention to language, I work to disrupt the habits and the hierarchy and the misogyny that is inbuilt into our language, and to create something new. So I'm going to be reading some poems from my latest collection, which is called Bach Archipelago, and it is available in the bookstore, so please, if you're so inclined.
And this is the first time she will be reading to this audience from that book, so we should celebrate this new book as well.
Thank you, Zilka. So, this is a poem called B Words. B words used to define and debase women. Broad and babe and bitch. I like bird the best. How she nests warm against a breast, 1 minute, gone the next. I am a creature of such piercing flights, such slow filling quills. This next poem is a poem in which I try to deconstruct the elements of performative femininity and domesticity. It's called Scar Abs. Scarabs is a word. As you know, it's a kind of a beetle, and it can also be used like a brooch. So I broke up this word and I made a scar in it by putting a slash, so it became scar/abs. I had to let the tweezers go to pry you loose. Oust the pageant box, Botox and tiara. There you were. Femur, tibia, coral knee, paddy fields of cilia and sebum, buoyant. Just beyond my reach again, I had to unscript an ending where the goal is the crease of your ironed shirt pressed into me, unending deal, playing cards, lying in a thick, dark bog, obfuscation tarot. Most of a blue whale song is a frequency so low it's inaudible to human ears. Her splendid baleen sifting in the lean as against the grain I throw up, sound out from the depths, echolocation of self from negative space, blow by blow, a stretch of smile, stone to strike, membrane of skin, drum, sea inside, call to cauldron. So this next poem, we all have had the experience of aunties, how they seem to be everywhere. So I took that ubiquitous auntie and I imagined a world in which they transmogrified into various plants and animals. So this one is called anthropomorphia. The eldest in the family tree rains barrage of sharp acorns. Wherever you go, a stubborn bombard tracks your ticks. Ladyfingers, not to be outdone, possess the art of unctuous intimidation, so slippery, before you know it, you're a fallen woman. The garden variety are a parliament of pale pink roses, faint blush, and thorn make short work of undefended flesh, nape, left tender, just in case a butterfly alights like a kiss. To them, you are forever perishable goods, a snowflake on a crow's wing in the cross airs of their hawking. And on a more serious vein, this next poem was inspired by the protests in Iran against the hijab. And I got to thinking about the hijab. It's just a piece of cloth. And I realized that cloth, even in South Asia, it's used in a manner of ways to control women. So this is called Uses of a Length of Fabric. Wrap a grave span around her girl body, smother puberty in folds heavy as blood clots. Make her a wedding bundle. What is hair if not a thread? Pull out an errant strand to make her understand the provenance of pain lies in the terroir of your hands. Muffle her cries, hide the burn marks, or let her dupatta catch fire in an airless kitchen. If all else fails, the clan's honor can be salvaged in a blanket cloud of suffocation, or by strangling the rebel in her sleep. Nothing like the fruit of blackmail to grow a pit in her stomach. Goad suicide by hanging a twisted bedsheet from a ceiling fan or her favorite mango tree. When you are done, the unstitched muslin obediently shrouds her in its silence, white, washing death. Thank you. Do I still have time? One short one. Don't know if I have a short one left, but I'll do an excerpt from a poem called Body of Work. And you know how women are objectified. So I thought I would take this objectification and make my various body parts talk. So I'll read a couple of excerpts from it. 1, heart. While I was away, dirty dishes aped Mount Everest. Zucchini grew monstrously inedible, while 200 cherry tomatoes sank into a desiccated fire. Dahlias died untimely deaths. The swollen mailbox had a baby. Loud bills cried, "Pay me, pay, attention." A mirage dissolved. My skipping heart beat. I sank a stone into the marriage pit. Okay, so yes, should we? Do you have um, any? Say something. What do you think?
You know, for me, one of the things that I really like about poetry is that you never feel, at least I don't feel, the compulsion to explain anything. You know, the abstraction it offers. And that is something that is very precious because I feel safe while doing it. I mean, I did go through a phase of, you know, angry rage and sloganeering and that kind of thing, but I think, I mean, I've outgrown it, and I think it's important. It's like a rite of passage for a lot of us because, you know, we've all had our share of abuse in whatever way. And I like to think that I've reached a place where, you know, I'm a calmer person. Um, but then it's not a choice for a lot of us, you know. It is a privilege to be able to say that, okay, I'm done with it now and I want to do these other things. For some people, it has to be done, it has to be kept on. So I wanted to know how you look at it and what are the phases that you went through and how your voice has evolved as poets.
So I ran away from home when I was 21. So definitely, I think it has been an evolution for me. Started writing when I was about 6, and you know, it was always the solitary voice, the suffocation, it was me reacting. And then I think when I left, that is really when I felt my evolution really started, because I was dropped into a very different linguistic environment. I mean, we're talking about the 80s when it wasn't this ubiquitous internet. You know, there was no, when I arrived in New York, that was it. It was, you know, cut off. You could only communicate through a trunk call, you know. One is hard to imagine now for those people who are young. So I think marooned into a different linguistic environment, I think definitely makes you grow up very fast as a poet and changes your entire perspective, because you think, oh, you know, misogyny, catcallings, all these attitudes towards women are only in South Asia, where it's not at all the case. They're universal. So it changes your outlook and the way that you look, because then you don't have an excuse, you know, you're not reactive, you have to become active. So.
Yeah, so my story begins in Mumbai, actually. My original roots, as I mentioned, are Ben Israel. We were not brought up religious, we were very secular. But at home, we still had the hierarchy. We still had the, you know, the patriarchal, the head of the family, my mother, the one who, you know, literally brought us up because my father was sailing. My brother and sister were sent to boarding school so that my mother could then sail along with my father. And I think those probably were great times because they saw the world, they made friends all over the world, and you know, and then I was born, and around that time my father got a shore job and then was transferred to Calcutta. So I consider myself a Bengali. I'm from Calcutta. I live in the US now though, but nothing else has changed. I'm still the same person that way. But what I wanted to mention to you is that I was very ill at the age of 6. I had polio. At that time, very little was known about polio, both in India and in the US. And if you remember some of those photographs of people in those iron lungs, especially, you know, around in the 60s, between the 60s and the 70s. But luckily, my parents were able to get me medical treatment quickly enough. I couldn't walk. Nobody knew if I would walk again. So I began to crawl in the house, which wasn't a big deal. I'd hold things up and walk around, and people would carry me from place to place because we didn't even have proper wheelchairs then. So a lot of the time they said, "Oh, this poor girl, what will her future be?" Then, I was a reader. I would go to, I still, my personality came through somehow, probably because my parents encouraged me to be who I am. But that whole effect of you are already othered. You're othered because you're a girl. You're othered because you're disabled. And then you're othered because you're a reader and you think you're too smart. You have the balance of all those things going on. But fortunately, with wonderful education that my parents gave me, but still at home, I still witnessed, all the gender roles and things like that. So I was battling them all the time. And I was constantly, even though my father was the one to just buy me all the books I wanted, buy all the music I wanted, there was still that sense of you cannot do this. You can't go to the US. I don't want you to go anywhere. So I think those are the things that sort of made me more and more aware of the battles we had to fight. And then outside, in the workplace, and everywhere I went. And it became this extremely sharp awareness of the differences, of how everything, they're very, very subtle and sometimes very, very obvious. And I taught in a boys' school for several years, so St. James School. So there too, the masters had a particular, they could get away with certain things. But I'm sure there are plenty of women professors and teachers here who know exactly what I'm talking about. But I offer you this story because that is where my awareness began, rather than this hard and fast rule of what is feminism. And that's how I became aware of it. And then, of course, reading and having just reading voraciously poets from India and the world. And then now reading contemporary poets, like my wonderful poet friends Sophia and Maithreyi, and I'm still learning. So I hand it back to you to give us any other offerings. And would somebody let us know about the time? Almost done? We're done? Okay. Then,
Are there any questions?
Yeah. So before we end, we can take a few. Oh. Yes, yes. I think
Yes,
we
please
needed
read a
her
poem.
to read a couple more. Yes.
Would you like me to read a translation? Because,
Yes,
yeah,
certainly,
sure, yeah,
certainly,
thanks.
Maithreyi.
So, I feel a translation of a poem ought to be a poem in its own right, because otherwise it tends to be just annotation. So I try to look at a poem as a whole rather than as the meanings of individual words. I want to read this translation that I did. It's not published anywhere, of an Akka Mahadevi Vachana. I'll read the original first. Even if you don't understand Kannada, it's okay because I'm going to read the translation. Just listen to the sounds of it. ಅಕ್ಕ ಕೇಳವ ನಾನೊಂದ ಕನಸ ಕಂಡೆ ಅಕ್ಕಿ ಅಡಕಿ ತೆಂಗಿನಕಾಯಿ ಕಂಡೆ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ಜಡೆಗಳ ಸುಲ್ಲಿಪೊಲ್ಲ ಗೊರವನು ಭಿಕ್ಷಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದುದ ಕಂಡೆನವ್ವ ಮಿಕ್ಕು ಮೀರಿ ಹೋಹನ ಬೆಂಬತ್ತಿ ಕೈ ಹಿಡಿದೆನು ಚನ್ನಮಲ್ಲಿಕಾರ್ಜುನನ ಕಂಡು ಕಣ್ತೆರೆದೆನವ್ವ. So I used to think of myself as incapable of bhakti of any kind, but this poem rendered as song by Pandit Mallikarjun Mansu, you should listen to it. It's just fantastic. It's pure magic. Something stirred, and I translated it. I've given it my own interpretation and musical touch. Paddy fields stretching helter-skelter, tall-tailed coconuts offering no shelter, wise betel nuts nodding good for shyly blessed womanhood. A glimmer of searing love had I once seen on the shut-eye screen, his hair unkempt, eyes wild, above and beyond mere meaning he had been. A vagabond, a handful of grain he sought, but it was my all he gained. He was a traveler of horizons, a goer, a lever, never held back. I ran and caught this wind sun and opened my eyes overwhelmed. Hear me, my sister, I had a dream. Won't you, my sister, hear my dream? Thank you.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful way to end, Maithreyi. And thank you all for being here. And I hope you'll buy some books and have us sign them for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.